the spring holidays title page, and we'll just go on. There's a dozen, some you've heard of. If I just went with the ones you'd heard of, you wouldn't learn anything. So I got to mention a few others. One thing, as you look at people who study, anthropologists and psychologists who study spring festivals, there's almost a consensus. It's a dominant view in archaeology, anthropology, that when people invented agriculture and animal husbandry, they started taking a lot greater interest in seasons and calendars and setting up special times and rituals certain times of the year. And that's the root of a lot of the holidays we have in the spring are rooted in the psychological, profound insights that come from seasonal changes. So spring can start as early as late January, February, if you're in Asia, where the Spring Festival, the Lunar New Year, begins shortly after the sun moves into the Aquarius constellation. So that's, yeah, like early February. In the West, that's celebrated, we have Imbolc, the Celtic or Indo-European people probably had a holiday halfway between the winter solstice and the vernal equinox. Japan has a similar ceremony, Setsuban, and Candlemas is it doesn't really endure in America very much. We have Groundhog's Day, but whatever. There's actually a very old kind of New Year that happens on the 1st of March that's mainly celebrated in Bulgaria, Greece, and Albania, Baba Marta. And then the vernal equinox, that's Nowruz. That's the new year for people in the cultural domain of Persian-speaking people in Central Asia and Iran, but also in the Turkish, Turkish people originally come from Central Asia. So in the Turkish world, that's also a big holiday. The Buddhists have also a ceremony that's sort of like a New Year around the vernal equinox, Hagan. Then, of course, the one that we're observing, Passover. It's held on the 15th day of the month of Nisan. And then Easter, the Sunday following the first full moon, occur after on or after the vernal. Hey, that shouldn't be solstice. That should be equinox. I messed that up there. And that's the one that most people in America have some experience with. Qingming, clear and bright, tomb sweeping day comes up around the same time. That's an important day in Eastern Asia, Southeast Asia, and it's a little bit like the Day of the Dead in Mexico. People go to the cemeteries and remember their family members. There's a lot of house cleaning. And then Rezvan is a Baha'i holy day that a series of holy days that occur in late April, early May season. Ramadan, because it's a lunar calendar and every year is a little bit shorter than the Gregorian calendar, it moves around. Ramadan, I can remember, was springtime back in the 80s when I was in college, and here I am, Middle Asian. Again, we're having Ramadan in the springtime. But there is a quote from the fifth Imam, al-Baqir, that says that's the spring season for the soul, or the Quran is Ramadan. Whenever Ramadan is, that's the springtime spiritually. Beltane, or May Day, Kalends Mai, that's a very old holiday, has pagan roots and is celebrated widely in Europe. There's a planting festivals all through April, March, even May, northern latitudes, and those are widely celebrated. And then the birthday of the Buddha, we're not really sure when the Buddha was born, but it's celebrated at various times of the spring. The Japanese and the Chinese and the Indians, and they all have different ways of calculating when the Buddha was born. But Buddha's birthday does occur in the spring. So looking at this calendar system, of course, the winter is associated with rest and darkness and death and quietude. And then in the spring, we get all these buds bursting with energy and these flowers emerging from the ground, and the snow is melting, and it's an exciting time. And people celebrate that time. And it has different names and different sort of dates that are emphasized. But I like the Chinese Eastern Asian calendar, where it's awakening of insects, and then the pure brightness comes, and the rain water period. People in China, at least in Taiwan, where they didn't have a cultural revolution, still recognize these days. You do make sacrifices and you do little things to honor your ancestors or go visit the temple, and very much regulated by this liturgical calendar, but it's in the sort of Confucian, Buddhist, Chinese folk culture tradition. And in Europe, we've lost the meaning of many of these things. Candlemas, okay, the French eat crepes, and we look and see if a groundhog can forecast the future, but these used to be very important holidays. And they go way back. When we look at some of the earliest megalithic structures, people were trying to calculate when is the sun going to come up in the due east and set due west, and when will the solstice occur? And so we have wood henges and stone henges, and clearly this was an important thing. Here in North America, people organized their cities around the east-west axis, and then also the solstice was observed. Here in the upper right, you can see a stone near Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, where they, on the solstice, the sun makes a little dagger through the spiral. Similar spirals over here in this tomb in Ireland, where the sun comes through on the solstice. But anyway, marking the equinoxes and the solstice became very important to people. It was central to their city planning and their agriculture. All right, Chinese New Year. I'm married to someone from the Chinese culture, and I've celebrated Chinese New Year with my family in Taiwan. And it's very much like American Thanksgiving. The family gets together on the first day of the new year, has a big feast, and they're all there, and they're all feeling very happy. And you give little gifts, but the gifts are just cash in an envelope to all the kids. But every day that follows for the first 15 days of that new year is a different day. There's a day when the daughters come to the homes of their birth origin, because on the day of the new year, they're with their husbands and their families. Then there's a day where you go and remember the dead. And then there's a day when you go and visit your friends. And the 15th day is the Lantern Festival, when they have beautiful lanterns. And so it's usually a 2-week holiday in East Asia. They take all their holidays and squash them together with the Chinese New Year. And they have traditional New Year's music, like Christians have Christian music, and people get tired of it because they just play the same songs over and over again. It's the same phenomena we have in the West. Candlemas. I don't know. Does anyone celebrate Candlemas? Do you light candles around the 1st or 2nd of February? Anyone? No one has that. Does anyone eat crepes? Anyone have any French culture? You eat crepes? No, this is okay. Well, it's a maybe a diminished holiday, but it's ready for it to come back. If you guys want to light candles and eat crepes on the 2nd of February, that's an option. March 1st. Do we have anyone Bulgarian, Greek, Albanian background that does any of this? But that's the beginning of spring, climatological spring. Talk to a meteorologist, and then why is everybody talking about March 21st? Astronomical spring and the first day of spring. March 1st is the first day of spring. But this is actually an old Scythian tradition, and commemorates, the blossoms are coming out. Bulgaria, Greece, Turkey, these are southern in Europe, so the trees are already in bloom, and they have a red and white sort of tradition. It goes back to the Scythians, so it goes back 3,000 or 4,000 years. Now here's Nowruz. Anyone a Baha'i or has a Persian background that wants to say anything about how you celebrate Nowruz? Does anyone sit at a table like this? If you have any Persian friends, any friends from Iran, and maybe Turkish friends or Kazakhstan friends or Turkmenistan, Azerbaijani friends, they might do this in their home. They might set out the sprouts and the flowers and the eggs and the apples and the garlic and the candles and the goldfish, the hyacinths. There's a traditional way of decorating when you set a table with all these things that remind us of the springtime, the new year, and spiritual qualities. As a Baha'i growing up in St. Louis, this was the biggest Baha'i festival of the year. We could get 300, 400 people in a big room, and there was dancing and singing and food. It comes at the end of a fasting period, so it's like it's like Eid, in that you've been fasting, and then this is the last day of the fasting, and then the fasting is over. So, all right, I know we have people here who celebrate Passover. Um, it's a time when the family gets together. There are jokes, there's songs, there's study of history, there's particular foods that have a symbolic meaning. And does anyone want to talk about any of their fondest things about Passover? Some of the things they love about Passover?
We tell the story of the Exodus. That's what we do on Passover.
Right. Is it widely considered to have a dual purpose? It's literally, yes, the people escaped from slavery and created a new nation, but also spiritually, there's that metaphorical thing of escaping from the bondage and achieving a sort of a liberation through a faith community. Is that
Well,
how it's understood?
I mean, it's the story of redemption for the Jews, and so I think that um, that we are enslaved in many ways throughout life, and so as a metaphor, I think that the Exodus and Passover really, you know, can be very relevant in a person's personal life, because many times throughout our lives we are, God frees us from slavery of one sort or another. Some people are slaves to money. Some people are, I mean, I was redeemed from a homeless shelter. I lived in a homeless shelter for 10 months at one time in my life, and lost everything. And whenever I think of the Exodus story for me personally, I always think of the fact that I was freed from the bondage of the homeless shelter, and given a whole other chance at life, just like the Jews were when they were freed from slavery in Egypt, and were given the Torah and the Ten Commandments. But God didn't. God metaphorically split the Red Sea for me, but I didn't walk through any water.
Eric, there's a kind of a subtext, a story that is related to this expression. I wish Susan Phillips was here with us, because she shared a post about how some of us within the Christian faith have, to some degree, co-opted this story and made it something we did in our churches as kind of like justifying our faith story. And it's a very sensitive area that that could, again, be a whole subject for us, how we have to be careful about appropriating other people's stories. I was struck by what she shared.
One of the things, thanks for sharing that, Dan, but one of the things that I go to, or get to go to, I'm honored to go to every year, or I have for the last couple since I've been here, because it wasn't done during Corona, is, Governor Pritzker is Jewish. And Governor Pritzker has a Passover Seder at the governor's mansion every year, other than Corona, obviously. And so, last Wednesday, a week before the actual holiday of Passover, there was a Passover Seder at the governor's mansion that was, that was not only Jewish clergy that were there. There were clergy of all other faiths, like Reverend Martin Wolf was there, Reverend Susan Phillips was there. There were other clergy from other faiths as well. So a lot of different faiths were represented at the Seder that Governor Pritzker had, which I find terrific.
Can I ask you if that's the ceremony where the bread or the leavening and the children are involved, and there's...
So it is Passover is a holiday where we eat matzah. We don't eat any bread. We actually clean our houses of what we call chametz, which is things that are not kosher for Passover. They may be kosher, but they might not be kosher for Passover. And we do not eat anything that has yeast in it, anything that's leavened, because the Jews, in their fleeing from Egyptian slavery, couldn't wait for the bread to rise, so they ate matzah, which is unleavened bread, basically.
I used to attend an evangelical, they had Brazilian pastors. It was on Maui. It was really an interesting church, but they celebrated Jewish traditions as well. And So the one year that I attended, there was some almost like a theatrical reenactment of something that the children had to go find something, or something was hidden, and I just don't recall. It was really amazing though how engaged the children got into the stories.
So what you're talking about is we hide a piece of matzah that's called the afikomen, and the children. So the head of the seder, whoever's leading the seder, typically hides it at some point during the evening, and the children look for it. And then there's typically a reward given to the child who finds the afikomen. Typically, some kind of a cash reward, but it could be other stuff too. Yep.
Thanks. That's good to remember that. That's
Rabbi, is there ever a song about the Holy One who slew the angel of death, who killed the butcher, who slew the ox, who drank the water that quenched the fire? Do you know anything about that song?
I'm not familiar with that particular song. We do sing a very, very well-known song on Passover called Dayenu, but I've never heard of that one. Dayenu actually means it would have been enough. And it goes through a whole rendition of, if God had done this, it would have been enough. If God had split the Red Sea, it would have been enough, and so on and so forth.
And there's bitter herbs, there's greens, there's a bone from a lamb, there's a roasted egg. Could you tell us anything about the foods?
So the foods represent all different things. And so we eat bitter herbs for, the bitterness of slavery. We dip the bitter herbs in salt water, we dip a vegetable in salt water, like a leafy vegetable in salt water, to represent the tears. There's a lamb shank that's on the Seder plate, because when God went to the leaders of the Jewish community and said, paint lamb's blood on your doorstep, and then I will know to pass over those homes as being Jewish homes, so that when I kill the firstborn of all Egyptians, I won't kill any of the firstborn of the Jews, because their doorsteps would have been marked. That's why we put mezuzahs on our doors. So there's a lot of there's like horseradish, that all the foods have different representations for different things. I won't go through them all, but they all have, on the Seder plate, which you see in the middle of this table, there's all different foods that all have a distinct representation for a particular reason from the Exodus.
And if we have Jewish friends or neighbors, is there a particular kind of gift or greeting or anything that we might do to show them where?
We just say Happy Passover, or you could say, if you can pronounce it, because Jews practice this for many, many years, you can say Chag Sameach. And if you can get the down, that's like what we're taught in Hebrew school from a very young age. So.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Well,
Chag Sameach, which is, basically a greeting of a joyous holiday.
Okay. And tomorrow is the first day?
Actually, Passover starts on, tomorrow, right. This is Tuesday. Yeah, tomorrow night. Okay. So all Jewish holidays go from sunset to sunset. And that's because that's how God created the world, right? He created evening before he created, or night before he created day. So Jewish holidays go from sunset to sunset. So Passover will start on sunset tomorrow night, and we'll go to sunset on the 13th of April.
And each day of Passover has a particular meaning or a ritual?
The first two nights, there are what we call Passover Seders, which are, typically celebrated within a family. We don't really do a lot in the synagogue for it. We have a special service on the last day of Passover, And then the days in between really, you know, I don't know that we associate a lot of meaning to the days in between, but and I'm talking about for most Jews. You know, the Orthodox would celebrate a little differently, but for the most part, it just runs for 8 days.
My reference book mentioned that in Northern Africa, Maimonides is celebrated the day after the end of Passover because he died during Passover and you can't celebrate.
That's
Anyway,
right.
it seemed like that, as someone who likes Maimonides, I was thinking maybe I was
Yeah.
trying to observe that this year.
Yeah.
All right, so
Yeah. That's enough about Passover.
yeah, it's Easter. Well, what an interesting blend we have of the way we celebrate Easter in this culture. We have this very solemn and joyous religious festival representing at a high level the redemption of humanity from sin and the promise of eternal life. And at the same time, we are celebrating fertility and spring with roots that go back possibly tens of thousands of years. And the two things are kind of commingled and co-joined in the popular folk culture and in the higher religious culture. But not all of us here are Christian or have a Christian background. Would someone who celebrates Easter want to say something about the meaning or the observances of Easter?
I'd like to point out kind of some customs that we practiced at St. Jude in Rochester. As we approached Ash Wednesday, which is the beginning of Lent, the 40-day period that leads to Easter, we would have the big Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday. We would have a children's family celebration in our parish hall with some games and food feasting. And then we would, like pulling a big train lever, everybody lurching forward, we would stop and we would move over to the church. And at that time, we would take the palms from last year's Palm Sunday and we would burn those to create the ashes that would be used for the next day, Ash Wednesday, because we're transitioning to this period of dying to self. And then we would have an additional, this is not something every church does, but we would take a banner from the church that said, Alleluia, which means he is risen. We would take that banner down and we would place it in a container in the baptismal font that would be dormant during Lent because it's a time of dying. So the baptismal fonts would represent going down the steps, dying to the old self. And then when Easter would come, we would pull the banner out, the word is proclaimed, and new life, so we're spoiled in our hemisphere that we have the season to mirror the holiday. In that, I walked at the Lincoln Memorial Gardens and I saw the burned prairie. And as I see the new shoots of grass, I'm reminded of that deep, deep imprinted message of life, death, and new life. And that really is the summation of this holiday, I think. I'd like to hear if there's anybody else want to add to that.
David.
Well, we just had our general conference of our church, and there were multiple speakers who spoke about the importance of Easter, but commemorating the resurrection of Christ. And an observation was made that we have great celebration traditionally of Christmas. And yet, if there were no Christmas, we'd lose a couple of, 2 or 3 chapters of Matthew and Luke. But if there were no Easter, there would be no New Testament. And the importance of the Easter commemoration and celebration, and just some observation about the need to recognize, even though socially, culturally, we put the emphasis on Christmas, which is a wonderful time and a great thing to be the birth of Christ to celebrate, but it was what we celebrate at Easter that makes the birth significant. So again, without Easter, there would be no Christmas.
I did grow up in a Christian church and sang in the choir. I know that some of the music that people associate with Christmas, like Handel's Messiah, it's actually a work for Easter. Um, so it's more appropriate to listen to the Messiah at Easter time. Although it does have a one or two songs about the birth. There is some good Easter music. I loved Rimsky-Korsakov's Russian Easter Overture, and there's certain choir music from the Russian Orthodox liturgical tradition. Very nice to listen to around Easter. But all the passions by Bach or Mozart, those are all Easter or Good Friday kind of songs or musical movements, and I think that's some of the most beautiful music in the Western classical tradition is around Easter.
If I can add one, on Good Friday, many Catholic churches will strip the church bare, basically like altar cloths. They'll even put a shroud cloth over any cross or crucifix. The whole idea is that the place is emptied of its decoration, and we're supposed to feel barren. Often people will use sticks that have no leaves on them, or desert scenes to indicate we're waiting for the new life to come. But it's a very profound absence that you feel when you see at the end of the service the priest stripping bare everything. So environment is important. Worship environment, that is.
Okay. Maybe we'll go on now. Tomb sweeping day. This is a typical thing. The family will get together. They'll head out to the cemetery and visit the tombs, the graves of family members. And it's time to cut the weeds and put some flowers and maybe burn some ghost money there. It's a ritual of burning things to send blessings to the people in the afterlife. Yeah, and a different attitude towards cemeteries in East Asia. In America, until 2 or 3 generations ago, Americans hung out in cemeteries. People would just go to the cemeteries for picnics and like, oh, let's be at the cemetery and go for a walk. And that has declined, but we still keep our cemeteries nicely manicured for the most part. Not so much in East Asia. They're pretty gloomy places and overrun with weeds. So tomb sweeping day is a lot of work. There's a lot of stuff to clear out. And in Taiwan, at least, you have to watch out for poisonous snakes that are lurking in the grass. You don't want to join your ancestors that day.
Yeah, in Korea, back in Korea is in my personal the family life is every Lunar New Year's we gather for the all the family gather together and go to the tomb, ancestor tombs, and then clean up and cut all the grass and clean it, and then honoring the ancestors. It is happen twice a year. As one is one of full moon in the autumn season after harvest. Another one is Lunar. It's kind of Chinese New Year. So all family gather together and clean up the tombs for the ancestor. Yeah, it was a long time practice in my personal families back in Korea. Yes.
Yeah, it's a very family-oriented tradition there. Getting together. Right. So Rezvan in the Baha'i religion celebrates a period of 12 days when our prophet founder, he was in exile from the Persian Empire into the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire had him located in Baghdad, where he was gaining a lot of respect and people were liking him. And the court in Persia didn't like that and said, hey, Baghdad's too close to our border, move him away, put him in Istanbul or somewhere else. So when the Ottoman authorities ordered the family to move, they gave them some time to prepare. And 12 of those days were spent in a garden on the island in the Euphrates River. I think, not the Tigris. Anyway, in Baghdad. And in that garden, Baha'u'llah pitched a tent and announced that there was the beginning of a new religion. So Baha'is celebrated with having parties, often in gardens, celebrating flowers, and they have elections then, because we have, rather than clergy, we elect our leadership, and they get elected during Rezvan. And the first, 9th, and 12th days of Rezvan are days where we're not supposed to work. So often I find a day like last week of classes where it's just, we'll do online discussion boards that week because I'm not going to come to school and teach on a holy day. Anyway, okay, so the Islamic calendar is lunar, and it's a little bit shorter than the Gregorian calendar. So Ramadan doesn't always occur in the spring, but for the next few years, it's going to be in the springtime, and then many years from now, it'll again be in the springtime. But Ramadan is a time that celebrates when the Quran was revealed, and the whole ideal of the revelation of the Quran to humanity, that God is giving guidance to humanity, and God is interested in humanity, and God is trying to have humanity turn away from evil and do good, is sort of the deep root of why people of the Islamic faith would fast from sunrise to sunset for the whole 30-day month. Do we have anyone who practices Ramadan? Are there Muslims here today? Well, the end of Ramadan, the last day, is a very important, maybe the most important day in Islamic calendar, Eid al-Fitr. And that's a big party day, and also a very spiritual day, the most wonderful day of the year. And that's coming up 30 days after the start of Ramadan. So late April sometime. If you have any Islamic friends, you can say Eid Mubarak, which blessings. I think Mubarak is Semitic. I think it may be the same in Hebrew. I'm not sure, but Eid Mubarak is the blessing for Eid, which is coming up at the end of Ramadan. In the meantime, if you have observant Islamic friends, you might not schedule any lunch meetings with them because they might not be eating anything or drinking anything, and so wait till after sunset to suggest any meetings with food. But often yeah.
Eric, yeah, I just wanted to mention something that I caught when I was watching Kansas State play in the NCAA tournament last week, that 2 of their players were Muslims, and they were observing Ramadan. I wasn't clear whether they were fasting or not, but I understand that one of them said that he would fast after the season was over. But I just found it interesting. It's obvious if you watch sports these days how there are many different traditions of the players participating as a team and doing it in a peaceful way, and nobody gets upset. It hasn't always been that way, and sports is not a pure activity even now, but it is interesting to observe that how different traditions can work together for a common purpose.
And a beautiful thing to see too. David?
I've lived over 5 years, about 5.5 years of my life in the Arab Middle East, mostly Egypt, but also in Iraq, where Ramadan was celebrated. And there are people, of course, who are out working, building buildings and things of that sort, and they are abstaining from food and water during that time, which is pretty tough. It's a serious commitment to observing Ramadan for some. And but in the evenings, as they break the fast, that's a time of celebration. And it's not just once, it's all month.
30 days.
And what's interesting is it was multiple people told me that it's not uncommon at all for people to gain weight during Ramadan, just because of the celebration at the at the end of each day. But it's a fun time to be there during the evenings as the fast is broken.
So as a hospital chaplain, I noticed when the Muslim patient died during the Ramadan, it is a kind of celebration. Only chosen by Allah can die during the Ramadan. It's a blessing. It's a straight way to the heaven. It's a kind of celebration is going on. So when we minister to the family who died during the Ramadan, is kind of, is instead of sadness, they have some certain kind of, it's joyous, it's expression because chosen by Allah. Only chosen by Allah can die during the Ramadan. It was a big surprise for me. Yeah, yes.
Well, here we are, May Day, Beltane, the point halfway between the solstice and the equinox, the vernal equinox, summer solstice. Well, it's widely celebrated. It's an important part of the calendar, but today it's mainly just maypoles, flowers, and it was chosen to be the International Day of Labor. And in most parts of the world, they do celebrate it. And that decision to make it May 1st honors people from Illinois, because we did have a movement, a labor movement in the 1880s in Chicago, and there was some terrorist exploded a bomb, and some policemen were killed. But instead of finding who did the bomb and arresting them, the authorities in Chicago just sort of arrested all these notorious labor activists, and then found them guilty, and some of them were executed. And they were martyrs. One of them might have had something to do with the bombing, but the others were clearly innocent. It was judicial murder. And it was in honor of these martyrs to the labor movement that the Third International decided to make Labor Day on May 1st. And, not in the United States, where the people were actually suffering for their struggle, but most other countries in the world honors Labor Day because of Illinois activists who up in Chicago on May 1st. But it has roots going back to these pagan ceremonies. Planting festivals. Well, there's too many of them to mention, but all over the world in the northern hemisphere and in the tropics too. In areas that aren't, South Asia and Africa, there's still sort of a wet season, dry season, and there's they tend to plant in April or May, just as people in the northern hemisphere would. So you have some very colorful festivals. Here's Japan, the rice planting festival. This is a Nigerian woman celebrate in one of the Nigerian the new yam festival, and Arbor Day, of course. Anyway, planting festivals are another fun thing to observe in the spring. And our final holiday I'll mention here is the birthday of the Buddha, which is celebrated either in April or May, depending on what country you're living in, and it's on a calendar that adjusts by a few days each year. But also Matsu's birthday. My wife's from Taiwan. In Taiwan, Matsu, they call her a goddess. It's more like a saint, like a Catholic saint. And she's sort of a goddess. The archetypal imagery is that she's like the Mary, the guiding star. And in fact, they use the same metaphorical words to describe Matsu as some of the way sailors in Europe, Catholic sailors in Europe, might describe Mary. And anyway, that's a huge thing in Taiwan. It can close down a city for 2 or 3 days with all the temples doing the processions. But anyway, it's fun if you're from East Asia, if you can get there in the spring for the Buddha's birthday. The legends of Buddha's birthday are very much like legends of Jesus, actually. So there's some common themes here. A lot of these spring festivals involve sweeping up, cleaning stuff, maybe searching through your house to find the stuff that isn't kosher. And that's associated also with chasing away bad spirits. The legends and the rituals are often about there's bad spirits around, and our spring festival chases them away. Chinese New Year, you survived. The monster didn't eat you, and congratulations or whatever. So cleaning up is a spring festival thing. Spring, when we say it's our time to do spring cleaning, that seems to be a deeply rooted psychological need after winter, I guess. The death defeated, death leads to life, rebirth. You know, all your Joseph Campbell or people that study myths and legends will talk about how the springtime, the time after winter, is when life emerges from the dead, out of the ground where we bury the dead or the ashes of the cremated dead are laid. Comes the food that we can consume. It's very graphically represented in some of the Mesoamerican, North American, Indian native beliefs with the blood drinking corn stalks or the life emerging from the bones of the ancestors. But we have it in all the Western religions as well, some degree of celebrating of life. Fertility, obviously. A lot of animals bear their young in the spring. It's when the birds are mating and setting up their nests. People notice that. So the feminine kind of association with fecundity and birth is celebrated in the spring. Most of these holidays, well, most holidays always are. You know, get together with family, have some public events, you hang out with people in the public, and the community is united in celebrating the holidays, and that leads to a question of appropriation and sharing. On one hand, holidays are nice because the whole community celebrates them, and that's sharing, and that's appreciating difference, and is a thing to be promoted. But there are issues of appropriation. Are we taking other people's holidays and making them our own, but not recognizing the deep, solemn spiritual significance of the holiday? And of course, that's a tension people have to resolve for themselves. But that's one of the things about holidays is you spend time with family, friends. And spring holidays are more often celebratory, joyous. They're singing, dancing, there's color. People have wonderful costumes, bright decorations. So these are things I notice as you look over them all. And just nature, here's some spring flowers coming up out of the snow. So life emerging despite the cold. And I love taking pictures in the springtime of the flowers, plant them in our gardens. Another theme is in holidays in general is fasting followed by celebratory feasting. So Eid al-Fitr at the end of Ramadan, Nowruz for Baha'is, or at the end of the month of Baha when we fast. Lent, the 40 days of fasting in the desert, or the time of death, as Dan mentioned, followed by Easter. And you can't really say that with Jewish holidays as far as I can tell. There are major fasts, a couple of them, but they're not necessarily around the spring. There's some minor fasts, only one of them is in March. But there are a lot of feasts in the Jewish holy calendar, and 4 of them are occurring in the spring. So there's more feasting than fasting in the spring, I guess, the Jewish liturgical calendar. And there's some fasting. I think this is an Eid dinner. We used to have 3 Muslim families on our block, and during Ramadan, they'd invite us over to their homes for breaking the fast with them, and they were wonderful foods. So if we kind of abstract it, we step back and sort of put them all in our mind. What's going on in the spring? What's going on with these holidays? I'd say that these are the themes. Suffering and sacrifice will be followed by blessings and joy. So that's winter going into spring, but that's our lives. Our lives, we reach a low point, and you can't get any lower, and then you find some way to get out of the low point, and then you have happiness afterwards. So grief can be conquered, death can be conquered, whatever. The denial of mortality. Today, still most Americans agree that some part of our existence survives physical death. So a denial of mortality is an affirmation of a spiritual nature of our consciousness or reality, and that we're not just material things. But even if you were a person who believed that death was the end, there's still the springtime shows that life goes on after death. So any kind of denial of mortality or triumph over death. Trust in divine justice. A lot of the holidays have to do with things look bad. It looks the bad win and the good are behind, but in the end, the good will come out on top. So Jesus was crucified like a common criminal, but then he's glorious. The Hebrews were enslaved, and then they had their glorious kingdom. gratitude, because the flowers are out and the trees are blooming and then the food will be coming. There's this gratitude for the blessings. Take gratitude for it. And then metaphorically, our spiritual life is very much like the spring. When we're praying, when we're being devotional, when we're being observant of the rules, that is a blessing, like the spring is a blessing for us in the seasons. And one more thing to note, in economic history, when we look at mortality rates in Europe, and this would presumably be true elsewhere in the Northern Hemisphere, the highest rates of mortality are in the spring, because the food that was consumed in the summer and the fall is running out, and you're down to the stuff that's in the cellar, and many of the animals that were slaughtered in the winter have also been eaten. So you find that the highest mortality rates were generally in the February, March into April, but then in April and May you start to get the initial vegetables that are coming up, and that the end of the hard times, the lean times, the late winter famine are coming. And so another reason to be happy you survived the late winter, early spring. And I would summarize these themes into three main themes. Endure. You can make it. There's something better ahead. And that's hope. Hope of life after death. Hope of it'll get better. It can't get any worse. Look to the good, the promise of the good. After all, spring, fall, winter. And then be grateful, appreciate. And even secular kind of scientific looking at spirituality, and when we identify as a social scientist, what are the aspects of spirituality that are beneficial? Gratitude, forgiveness, awe, community, meaningfulness, whatever. The gratefulness is a very powerful one. If people can be trained to every day be grateful, it has tremendous benefits on their mental health and their social relations. And the spring festivals tend to be festivals of gratitude and appreciation. So I don't know, I've got these poems that have to do with the springtime. As I look at the poems I enjoy that relate to the spring, like Wordsworth's Daffodils, they're reminding us to look at the beauty around us, and to it's not just a distraction to appreciate a walk in the nature and coming across a field of daffodils. It's a thing that you can return to whenever it's a dark time and you're all alone. And that, of course, to me resonates with religion. If people are letting you down and there's horrible misfortunes that occur, well, that's just the waves coming, and the foam on the waves can blow away. The deep core is your religious center. So I like springtime poems that have that message. I don't know, does anyone know this poem? The Daffodils? I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills. And all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle in the Milky Way, it stretched in never-ending line along the margin of the bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show had to me brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which in the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. Good old Wordsworth. Yeah, there's poems about cherry blossoms. Of course, there's an entire cherry blossom. That's why I didn't even mention it's a big celebration in Japan. There's sometimes, I don't know, this one by Edna St. Vincent Millay is more like, hey, April, all these flowers, you're reminding me of stuff, but people die, we are mortal. The line eaten by maggots is central in this poem, referring to the corpses of people that are in the cemetery. And yet, you have to have that insight to really appreciate the depth of the power of Easter or Passover or Eid or whatever, the Nowruz, that this is really, you're really handling a pretty deep trauma of death that you're up against with springtime festivals. I don't know if you guys know Wendell Berry, the farmer from Kentucky. Some of you may know I have been farming in the summers a lot lately on my dad's farm, which is mainly an orchard. And this poem, which is too long to read, or you can only share excerpts of it here, is meditative on the way we prepare for the future. And that goes to the hope and to the endure. Endure the hard times because the good time is coming and you have to get ready and prepare. So you prune your trees or graft them. I did a lot of grafting last week on my pear tree. And you do that to get benefits in the future. Now let's get into some scripture rather than just poetry. Would someone like to read the 13th chapter, verses 1 through 9 of Matthew, the parable of the sower? Anyone know this one? Yeah, okay, Kathy, you want to read this?
That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, "A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear." Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13, verses 1 to 9.
So throughout the last 9,000 years or so, most people have been farmers or worked on farms and agriculture. And this kind of metaphorical, in fact, the next verses, if we read on, the disciples asked, "Why are you always telling us metaphors?" And he said, "It's easier to understand metaphors." Parables, but parables, metaphors. The point is, this season, the season of sowing, has a corresponding many corresponding spiritual lessons for us. One of them being, think about where you're planting ideas. Are you trying to make social change? You're trying to grow spiritually. Sometimes there's fertile soil. Sometimes there's soil that it's not ready. Nothing's going to happen. All right. A similar metaphor from one of the Baha'i hidden words, also using soil and seeds as a metaphor. We have a couple Baha'is. We had a couple Baha'is in the audience. Let's see. Dolores, did you want to read this one? The hidden words? Or
if you want me to, I can.
sure, go ahead.
Quaff, O son of my handmaid, quaff from the tongue of the merciful the stream of divine mysteries, and behold from the day spring of divine utterance the unveiled splendor of the day star of wisdom. Sow the seeds of my divine wisdom in pure soil, in the pure soil of the heart, and water them with the waters of certitude, that the hyacinths of knowledge and wisdom may spring up fresh and green from the holy city of the heart. From the hidden words of Baha'u'llah.
So we grow hyacinths in our yard, and I just love hyacinths. And evidently, for many centuries, they've been a metaphor. Hyacinths have been a metaphor for spiritual wisdom and insight. And I didn't really know that until I looked up some stuff about this particular hidden word. But it's another example of using agriculture or planting and growing in spring metaphors to get spirituality. I think I'll do one more. This is a longer one, but I think this is just like the essence of what I'm talking about with springtime being a metaphor for a spiritual condition. And so this is a talk that was attributed to Abdu'l-Baha. He was the son of Baha'u'llah, a person who really took over the Baha'i faith and helped spread it around the world and make it accessible to people from all corners of the earth. I mean, he did some tours of Europe and North America, and people took notes at those tours. And sometimes the notes are very accurate. We can cross-check them with Persian original things that got written down. And sometimes we don't really know if that's what he really said, because the people who took the notes were hearing it in translation and might have. And this is one from a book called The Promulgation of Universal Peace. Abdu'l-Baha said something like this, and Joseph Hannen is the one who wrote the notes. And Joseph Hannen is considered a fairly reliable note taker. So whatever Abdu'l-Baha said, it was probably close to this. At the time of the vernal equinox in the material world, a wonderful vibrant energy and a new life quickening is observed everywhere in the vegetable kingdom. The animal and human kingdoms are resuscitated and move forward with a new impulse. The whole world is born anew, resurrected. Gentle zephyrs are set in motion, wafting and fragrant. Flowers bloom. The trees are in blossom. The air temperate and delightful. How pleasant and beautiful become the mountains, fields, and meadows. Likewise, the spiritual bounty in springtime of God quickens the world of humanity with a new animus and vivification. All the virtues which have been deposited and potential in human hearts are being revealed from that reality as flowers and blossoms from divine gardens. It is a day of joy, time of happiness, a period of spiritual growth. I beg of God that this divine spiritual civilization may have the fullest impression and effect upon you. May you become as growing plants. May the trees of your hearts bring forth new leaves and variegated blossoms. May ideal fruits appear from them in order that the world of humanity, which has grown and developed in material civilization, may be quickened in the bringing forth of spiritual ideals. Just as human intellects have revealed the secrets of matter and have brought forth from the realm of the invisible the mysteries of nature, may minds and spirits likewise come into the knowledge of the verities of God and the realities of the kingdom be made manifest in human hearts. And this was a speech he made to an interfaith audience. So this was given to everyone of all faiths as a way of considering how the spring is a physical reality that has a reflected reality in the spiritual world that all of us in our various religions can have, of becoming revivified. All right, so that's what I had. If anyone has any poems or like scriptural parts that have a metaphor that has to do with springtime imagery, if you want to share anything, I'll share in the chat a couple YouTube things I made. During my sabbatical, I spent some time in France, and I recorded some things that happened in a cathedral and in a church, and then I took pictures of things I observed at that time of year, and I made videos that are up on YouTube. So I'll share those with everybody. Anyone?
Bear with me here. This is to some that might not seem very religious, but I have an image that really speaks a lot, and you'd have to be from the Chicago area to really kind of grasp. This is a picture by the Chicago Tribune artist, and the caption reads, "Hope springs eternal," and there's one little guy in the very front with like a little Hawaiian shirt and a Cubs hat. Everybody else is in these thick parkas because in opening day in Chicago, the lake wins. But the deeper metaphor is that, you know, we always saw ourselves pre-2016 as a people of woe and suffering. And religious people could really appreciate that the Cubs were just in this perennial losing tradition. And so this image was created just to, out of the cold confines of Wrigley Field comes, you know, hope springs eternal. So it just seemed to fit from some of the poems you shared. I hope you guys don't mind It seems similar.
I think that's one of the ways that a person could be spiritual, is to notice that the themes we have in our religious life are reflected also in the secular world. The profane and the sacred aren't that different, or don't have to be that different. So sometimes sports fandom can be a little bit like for spiritual blessings. Why not? Why put up such a big barrier between our secular life and our religious life? Well, I've got to get to campus and teach a class at 2. If you look in the chats, I've got a link to the presentation, and if I'd had more time, I would have more richly illustrated it with my photography. I love photographing springtime flowers and so forth. So I may tinker with that presentation and make it a little bit longer with more images. But in the meantime, anyone who wants to can use it and have it. And then I've posted links to a couple little YouTube things on Easter and Good Friday that are completely original, with my field recordings of devotional music and photographs related to Easter and Good Friday. So you can copy those down if you'd like.